geoengineering options is removing CO2, right, compared to putting space mirrors up in space and messing with a complex system that we've screwed up without even really intending to. You think all else being equal, some of these subtractive options can be better. So I'll stop there. I think the main takeaway for me, if you can think of in the amazing work you're doing, if this talk could help you think of more of your options, right? To make things better, you can add to the situation and you can subtract to the situation. And I hope that you will, take more of your options to the very important work that you all are doing for all of us. So thanks.
Great. Thank you, Leidy. Appreciate that. As I'm going to quickly jump over to Chrissy, and then, but Leidy, you might be thinking, if it is, just as a question I'd have is, if it's more work to do less cognitively, just people default to more, does the research in that sort of cognitive and behavioral science work that you do, are there any tricks, for lack of a better word, or ways to do that? So just hold that thought and think about that. We might come back to that one.
There are. I'll see that.
Oh, good. Yeah. So there's a teaser. Stay tuned. So I think we had a second poll question just to throw in here. And this is on recycling. And this is an interesting one because Chrissy actually knows a bit about this whole question of the packaging work in Maine that she'll probably talk a little bit about. But if we were actually able to recycle 50% or more of Maine's packaging, how many cars would that be? What's the equivalent in number of cars off the road? So take your shot at that, and we will share the results and then the correct answer when Chrissy gets to it and whenever her thing comes along there. So Chrissy, let me just quickly also just encourage people, questions, start throwing them in the Q&A function, and we will get to them when we move all the way through. Chrissy.
Thanks. Yeah, let me just pull up my presentation here. Leidy, what you were saying resonates so strongly with me, especially when I am working in communities at, whoops, hold on one second, let me share my screen, whoops. The buttons are moving on me. When I'm working at the community level, the question is always, what can we do? It's never what can we stop doing? And it's, everybody, you make an agenda, and at the end, there's always next steps, the things to do, the to-do list. And so I would love it if my job was, what can I not do? Right. So yeah, my wheels are really turning, but I'm going to talk a little bit about Maine's extended producer responsibility for packaging law first. And before I do that, let me just back up a little bit. So I'm Chrissy Adamowitz. I work at the Natural Resources Council of Maine as a Sustainable Maine Outreach Coordinator. As Tim indicated, it is my job to sort of work at the local level with communities to help people sort of become activists and reach their activist goals locally and at the state level. Mostly that's to do with waste and waste issues. So recycling and composting and reducing food waste, if reducing it before it begins, but also composting and everything. I work at the Natural Resources Council of Maine. It's located in Augusta. We've been there for about 60 years. And as a whole, our organization really does focus on political advocacy at the State House. My director, she's there all the time. She's a registered lobbyist. So, we're really there protecting Maine's environmental laws and also defeating really bad laws. But my department's a little bit unique because I do get to work locally. And I really love that part because it's a little bit corny, but I really believe that that change happens because of people like you, like speaking up and stepping up. The extended producer responsibility law would have never happened if it wasn't for our regular people just like saying, yes, we want this. And I'll get into that in a second. This slide just gives you an overview of what I'm going to talk about. I'll try to be quick, but my secret is that I love talking about extended producer responsibility for packaging, and I'm like thrilled to talk about it again. So I'll try not to be long-winded about that, but I do want to just sort of say what it is and what you can do to stay informed about it, because we're not out of the woods yet. And then I'm going to talk a little bit about the reuse and refill economy and how to reduce your packaging waste, just to bring it a little bit closer to home with this less is more topic. Okay, so extended producer responsibility for packaging is a brand new law that NRCM really advocated for. We worked on it for about 3 years. It was an a successful attempt to save Maine's municipal recycling programs, because starting in about 2018, and again with the pandemic, there were major market disruptions, global disruptions in the recycling economy, and recycling systems across the nation and here in Maine were crashing. And we were really worried that we were just going to completely lose our recycling programs. So we wanted to implement a type of law that's used all over the world to save those programs. And basically what it does is it requires the brands packaging, so like Coca-Cola and Pepsi and Amazon and Walmart, all those big corporations, to pay municipalities to manage that packaging waste, instead of having taxpayers be the people responsible for paying for that waste. And the reason that these programs really work is because it gives the Department of Environmental Protection the right levers that they need to incentivize waste reduction upstream. So again, less is more. How do we convince these multinational brands that less is more for Maine? Well, you pass this law and you can start pulling the levers to get them to play ball with us. And that's what we did. We're really proud that this passed. We were first in the nation to do it. And what it'll do is it will provide a lot of stability for Maine's recycling programs to increase the capacity of municipalities to service a lot of towns that don't have service, to provide consistent public education, increase access. So we're really excited. It was passed in July of 2021. And we're working towards implementation, but that's a long timeline, and I'll get to that in a minute. The reason that we want to really focus on packaging is because, believe it or not, packaging is like a gigantic part of the waste stream. It's about 40%, and that's a number from Maine DEP's most recent solid waste management report. About 30% of it is organic material. So again, there's a lot of ways you can reduce that. It really is no need for organic material to be in the waste stream. And then the rest is just sort of other, and I'm not going to talk about that today, but 40% is packaging. And that, it makes sense. If you sort of look in your recycling bin, it's all packaging. You look in your trash can, a lot of it's packaging. So it kind of goes unnoticed, and we really need to address it and reduce it. This is just a map of the where extended producer responsibility laws are. So they're really, there's a lot of global experience. They're done all over the world. And we're just really proud to bring it to the United States for the first time. Oregon was right behind us. They passed their law in the summer as well, but we were number one. So that was really fun. And this is just, people like this slide. I just wanted to show you the types of brands that pay for these recycling programs. So you'll see back on this slide, a lot of Canada's provinces have it. Not all of them, but a lot of them do have this type of law. And so, you know, this is just public record. These are the types of brands that are paying for Canada's municipal recycling programs. So these companies, they're used to it. It's actually really a drop in the bucket for them, and it's going to make a major difference here in Maine. So getting back to this reducing concept and eliminating unnecessary packaging, there are examples from other programs in the world where these laws have incentivized the elimination of unnecessary packaging or the reduction of it. So I've got two examples here, one from Belgium. Their producer responsibility law has been in place for, I think, over 30 years. And now companies like L'Oreal are offering refillable shampoo dispensers so that you don't need the package at all. You can bring your own package and get a refill. Imagine if we had that here. Similarly, Italy has had their law, I think it's been like 15 years, don't quote me on that, but they've had it for a while. And they, here's an example of a company that's a curtain rod accessory. You know, you can see these statistics here, how much they decreased their packaging because they had this extended producer responsibility law. So our law, we hope that eventually we'll get to a place like this. There's no promises in the law to do this. There's language in the law to incentivize this and get there. But, you know, it's up to us. It's up to us, the people of Maine, to really speak up and make sure that the Department of Environmental Protection goes in this direction and puts those incentives in place. Here's a long timeline for implementation. And we're sort of still at the very, very beginning. Like, we're starting like well before the timeline really has even started. This summer is a big moment when DEP will have money to hire the person to basically start the implementation process. And we are very, very committed to making sure that the stakeholders, which includes you, have a say in the rulemaking of this law. And rulemaking is basically basically filling in the details of the law. And we definitely need activists and municipalities speaking up in order to get to that place where the law is really incentivizing reducing. I'm going to skip some of these slides for time, but you can stay informed by signing up for NRCM emails. Just go to nrcm.org/takeaction. The other thing you can do is sign up for DEP alerts for this particular law by emailing mainepackagingepr@maine.gov. And I would be more than happy to talk with you on the phone, or you can talk with you over email about how to do that. I think Lee would probably be happy to share my email with you. We also have this website that's pretty easy to remember, recyclingreform.org, that's got everything you need to know. So I encourage you to go there if you want to stay informed about this exciting law. Okay, so we have a long time before this law gets implemented fully. And so what can we do in the meantime about packaging? Because again, we really want to focus on packaging since it's 40% of the waste stream. Well, let me tell you a little bit about the circular economy. That's a really fancy way of saying the reuse and refill economy. I think it's a little easier to call it that. But basically, there are a lot of businesses popping up in Maine and around the country that are really focused on reducing and eliminating the need for packaging in the first place. They're forming completely new business models, and it's really exciting. And so we want to support that and be mindful of our packaging. The Maine food policy, the Maine DHHS, Department of Health and Human Services, recently updated their Maine food code to allow eating establishments to provide reusable takeout food containers. And I'll show you a little bit more about that later, but these are just some examples of how this reuse and refill economy is starting to pop up. So let's talk a little bit more about what you can do here in Maine. Hopefully you've heard of GoGo Refill and We Feel Good and Dental Lace. These are three of my favorite local businesses that have popped up to support the reuse and refill economy. You can go to these places. GoGo Refill is located in South Portland, and We Feel Good is located in Kittery. And you go there with your reusable container, so like a glass jar. You can save an old pasta sauce jar, or you can buy your ball jars, whatever you want. It can be any container, and they will fill up that container with this list of things. So they have liquid lotions and detergents and soaps, deodorant, toothpaste, cleaners, shampoo and conditioner, beauty products, cleaning supplies, kitchen supplies. They've really got pretty much everything you need to survive, really, for your house, your health and home. And they'll do it for you. So you don't, if you're a little shy with the concept of bulk refills and how that system works, you don't have to do any of that. They do it for you. So it's full service, and they're great. And it's just so wonderful to be able to get all of that stuff refilled. And you can just make a habit and go there time and time again and avoid packaging altogether. So, oh yeah, I forgot to put this little stat in. So I put this stat in because it goes to show that businesses have a really serious role to play in helping us reduce our own waste. So GoGo Refill's statistic is that they prevented 20,000 packages in year one of their business being open. So if you're a business owner, or if you know a business owner, you should have that conversation. That's one thing that you can do as an activist, is have those conversations about, hey, we need zero waste options on the shelf. A big problem the eliminating your waste is that there just often aren't options there to do it. So when businesses sort of offer that, it can make a big difference. So have those conversations. And, you know, I'm sure some of you or most of you know, but I just wanted to sort of get back to basics here. You know, when you're at the grocery store, don't forget to just prioritize unpackaged foods. And I know it's back to basics, but I also know that like when you get really busy, it's easy to forget. But, you know, there are a lot of produce options of it that are unpackaged. There are a lot of bulk options in Maine. And I encourage you to put in the chat the places that you get your groceries that can help other people sort of identify those places to go to get those unpackaged groceries. You know, farmers markets and small grocers are really good places to get unpackaged foods. And the great thing about those places is you can talk one-on-one with the producer and say, hey, you know, I really don't want this packaged. Can you offer me something different? And, you know, if enough people say that, it gives them an incentive to do that. Kind of like that great chart that Leidy put up, the lazy less chart, I'm going to call it. I love that chart. That should be a t-shirt. It takes a little upfront planning. And so, you know, you're going up, it takes a little more brain power, but once you do it, once you create a routine, it's a lot easier. It takes a little planning. A little meal planning is great for reducing food waste, but also reducing your packaging waste because those things really go hand in hand. So make a list of everything you need and the places to get it and share that information with your friends and in your social networks and make a routine. And that's the way to really get started to reduce your packaging waste. Again, natural food stores are great places to get your dry bulk, your produce, your oils, and farmers markets for those things, plus produce and meat and dairy. You can go to the brewers direct to get beer. So again, put in the chat the great places that you go to get unpackaged goods. When you're at an eating establishment, AKA a restaurant, there are some things you can do, but restaurants are a little bit tricky because of food codes. But again, the Department of Health and Human Services just made it a little bit easier by allowing restaurants to offer third-party reusable to-go containers. These places, especially with COVID, have become really heavily dependent on disposable packaging. So some of the things you can do to sort of get out of that habit is to make sure that you're dining in when you can, and ask to be served on real dishes with real forks and that sort of thing. When you're getting your coffee, don't forget to bring your reusable mug, and you know, you can use it for other things too. If there's a soda fountain, you can use it for that or other beverages that you're getting. You can bring your own reusable Tupperware when you're to your restaurant and put your leftovers in it. The restaurant isn't technically allowed to take your container and put a whole meal, an uneaten meal in it. And that's a technicality that, you know, I don't, you know, maybe we'll be able to change one day, but for now it's just, you can put your leftovers in the container. And then again, it's just sort of creating that buzz and asking those restaurants to think about offering unpackaged items and saying no to unnecessary accessories. So a small example is, you know, if someone might, a barista or something might automatically put like a disposable fork and knife in your bag, and you want to just say, no, I don't need that because I'm going home and I have real silverware there. So getting in the habit of doing that can help raise the awareness. And then, as Tim stated, you know, you want to take those individual actions, but we really need to scale up. You know, it's so important and it's so easy to do. You know, to share what you know with restaurants and your neighbors in your town about how to reduce waste, and it feels really good. You know, so some of the things that we can do, and this is where I come in. So, you know, if you want to scale up and work in your community, just get in touch with me. I'd be more than happy to help you. But some of the things that you can do, and people are doing all over the state, you know, they're looking at passing local foodware ordinances. So kind of like the local plastic bag ordinances that were popular in the past, you know, you can sort of take it further and disincentivize disposable things like coffee cups with price incentives. You know, why not help a local entrepreneur start a refill business? If you know about how to operate a business, get one started with an entrepreneur. because we don't have enough of them. And again, working with your grocers and your farmers markets to offer unpackaged products. And not only am I available to help you one-on-one, but we also offer seed grants. So if you need a little startup cash to get a project like this off the ground, we've got that available for you. Okay, that's it. Thanks so much.
Chrissy, thank you. That was packed with all sorts of great stuff. You know, let me just sort of, because you're sort of on a roll here, let me just sort of fire a first question right to you. You know, there was reference a couple of different times to the explosion in online ordering that we've seen, and you know, and I am guilty as charged here. During the pandemic, it's just, I mean, just the cardboard alone, but then there's the packing inside all those, but you know, the cushioning inside all those boxes, and then there's, you know, a lot of this stuff. I mean, there are some truly absurd packages that get shot out there. I mean, I guess there's a lot of obvious answers to that question, but what do you recommend to folks in trying to manage that? I mean, the convenience lure is so powerful, and maybe there's a behavioral element of this as well, Leidy, to jump in on. But Chrissy, what do you advise people in that area?
Well, yeah, I mean, there are the obvious things, and I will say that those are really the top things that you can do, which is to try to buy local in store, because that also supports your local economy in other ways that is beneficial to sustainability. You know, the other day I was ordering some books and I had to stop myself because I almost bought them on Amazon. And I said, you know what? No, I can buy this from Sherman's, which is our, you know, down in Freeport. I can take the train to go to Sherman's and get my book, and I don't have to have any packages. And so it took a little bit of work to remember to do that. But I did it. And I think it's just having that, recommitting to that. You know, it's the new year, you might as well just recommit now to sustainability and just, you know, just do it, because not only is it better for the environment, it's just better for our local economy and our community. So try to shop local, because you'll have more opportunities to avoid that waste altogether. And again, it gets you out, it connects you to people. So that's the obvious thing I would encourage you to do. But I will go back to this budding reuse economy that's happening. There are circular delivery packages being made, which is really cool. There are a couple of brands off the top of my head. I think there's one called Reloop and Lime Loop. No, I think the one's Lime Loop, and then there's another one. But you can Google it, and I'm sure you would find it. But basically, instead of getting, if you were to order a piece of apparel online, instead of getting a t-shirt in a flexible plastic bag that you would have to take to the grocery store to recycle, you would get it in a reusable bag that you could send back to the manufacturer. So that's super cool. There aren't a ton of options that I know of in Maine. I think that if you were to buy something online at Co, which they have a retail outlet in Freeport, if you were to buy something from them online, you can select their reusable packaging and have it delivered in their reusable package. Try it through them, I believe. However, I talked to them recently and they said it's in such high demand that they're struggling to keep inventory. But just be aware that those things are starting to crop up, and you should keep your eyes open for those options, because we want to definitely encourage them and support them. So yeah, I'll just stop there. Yeah.
Maybe, Leidy, I'd like to sort of pull you into this, you know, tackle it any way you want, but just from the, you know, is there any sort of brain science or cognitive work that's been done that gives an insight into, you know, ways that you can sort of, we can nudge ourselves just to do the right things, you know, once you know what the right thing is, but it's kind of counterintuitive, or at least counter norm, you know, on things like this with, you know, where do you order, or what do you do in packaging and things like that?
Yeah, I think one counterintuitive thing that kind of ties into subtracting a little bit too is the removing barriers, right? And that was in Chrissy's last slide, that oftentimes we jump right to like, how do you incentivize this? What new thing do we start to make this happen? And really the reason it's not happening, and maybe like the food takeout example, is like, what are the barriers to people making the more environmentally responsible decision? And then you work on those barriers, right? And so again, I think there needs to be incentives too, and there's some very real challenges right around COVID and people stuck at home, but also understanding those barriers and working to remove those is often the better way to make change in a system. And I think on the behavioral science standpoint, when you're talking about systems, right, if you add an incentive, you're moving things in the direction of the behavior that you want, right? But you're also adding tension in the system. And so the example I use in the book, when I get Ezra, I'm like, okay, I want him to eat some healthy dinner. And I say, okay, Ezra,
good luck with that.
Yeah, good luck. Exactly. We're stuck on like noodles. That's the healthiest thing he eats. But Ezra, if you eat the noodles, you can watch a show, right? And that incentive might work, but it also increases tension in the system, right? And so it's like, if he doesn't eat the noodles, now he's mad because he's not eating what he wants to, and he's mad because he's not getting a show. And so figuring out what the barrier is and removing that, in this case, I don't know what the solution is there, but I think that's kind of relevant there. And there's all kinds of information too about the other thing that I think is really relevant here is just the visibility. This is something that disproportionately affects subtraction, right? And so there's these beautiful studies of solar panel diffusion. And what they basically show is that if you can see a solar panel from your house, you're more likely to have solar panels on your own house, right? Because there's this visible action and there's social proof, right? So the social proof is like, hey, my neighbor's doing this. I respect my neighbor. This must be a good thing to do. I'm going to do it. But when you subtract something like reducing food waste, I have no idea if my neighbors are reducing food waste, right? So it's like, how do we make these good subtractions more visible? And I mean, Chrissy the public education is contributing to that. But I think when we're making all of these changes, if you do something that you're really proud of that is better for sustainability and as a subtraction, the second piece of it is how do you keep this visible and make that, it creates a feedback loop, right? Because now there's visible behavior, proof, more visible behavior, more proof. And that's why our adding has taken off. And how can we create the same thing for beneficial subtractions anyway?
Yeah, I really like what you said about removing barriers as opposed to adding, not as opposed to, but perhaps before adding incentives. Before adding incentives. And I'm remembering there's been some great work done about how do you form healthy habits. And one of the things, you really need to exercise, but if you imagine kind of what are the things beyond sort of just, I don't like to exercise, it's too much work, but are there things that get in the way of doing that? Getting dressed in the morning, I just don't want to root around for that clothing and stuff like that. So you lay it out in advance. And people have figured out really interesting ways to reduce the barriers to doing the right things. And Chrissy, I was struck, one of the things you mentioned was there are rules that require establishments, you mentioned restaurants, to do things in a certain way. Well, do they really have to do it that way? What's the reason for that? And because if that requirement goes away, then maybe a bunch of other things become much easier to do. So it's actually a subtraction. And I've actually noticed, just to give a little shout out to Otto's here in town, they ask, do you need forks and knives before you go? And who needs a fork and knife if you're taking a pizza home? You've got knives and forks at home. So I thought that was a really good move on their part. And, it's just that somebody thought about something. And of course, they save a little money by not throwing that stuff out the door too. Chrissy, before we get any further down the road, there was that poll question about 50% reduction of packaging and cars off the road. What was the answer?
166,000.
Wow. I think that might have been the highest choice on there too. That's pretty impressive. Mm-hmm. That's a lot of cars.
Yep.
Yeah, go ahead. I mean, did
Well,
you want to follow up on that?
We use the warm model to figure that out, which is a really cool tool if you're doing local work on waste management and you sort of need to defend your waste diversion practices and, tying that to climate change. Super useful tool.
And is there an update that you could give us on the plastic bag ban? I know it went on hold sometime during the pandemic. What's the status of that now?
It was implemented in July, along with the polystyrene foam food container ban.
So it's back in force now?
Yeah, yep, July. Mm-hmm.
I should have noticed that, but maybe I'm not paying attention in the grocery stores. There's another question that came along here about how much do you need, how long do you need to keep a reusable mug? How many times do you have to reuse it to cover the energy investment, material investment in making the mug in the first place?
There's a really fantastic report called Reuse Wins by Upstream Solutions. And you can find them at upstreamsolutions.org. And the founder is actually a former NRCM employee too. So he's in the family. And that really does a great job showing you the different types of impacts that a reusable container has. So I don't know off the top of my head, but I encourage you to look at that report. It's pretty good. I think the thing is like, I always recommend people to take life cycle analyses with a grain of salt. So you're going to, if you Google a question like that, you're going to see a lot of mixed information about it. I would say that industry reports always leave out the impact of plastic on the environment when it comes like in the sense of litter and ocean plastic pollution. They never account for the impacts on wildlife, things like that, or your health. So when if you're interested in life cycle analyses, like just be careful, like think about like the whole system and really read about like what they're assessing in that analysis.
Great, thank you. I know I will say that we will do a summary of this and email it out to all the people who are participants who registered. So we'll get those links and those recommendations in that summary. Excuse me. Question about the impact of the basically you've made as for a long time now, 30 or maybe even now, I'm getting old, 40 years, probably more like 40 or pushing 50 years, a bottle deposit law with, you pay a substantial deposit. And actually when I worked in the legislature, legislation was passed to add that to liquor bottles with a 15-cent deposit. So it demonstrated that people are willing to pay those higher deposits. Is there any work that's been done? I know this is on the incentive side and not on the removing barrier side, but what's the thinking these days on the effectiveness of deposits on products and the possibility of raising those deposits? And this might have a practical political side to it, Chrissy, but it also might have sort of Leidy, that sort of, is there a diminishing return side to it that people see in social behavior experiments? So either one of you jump in with there any thoughts on that?
Well, I'll just say our bottle deposit law is like extremely successful. Like we've got, I think, close to like 90% recycling rates for bottles. That's like the best recycling rate you can get. So it's pretty successful. As far as the increasing the deposit, the legislature did in recent years, I don't think it was last year, I think it was the year before, increase it by 1 penny. So not like really that much. I think we'd like to see more, but they did increase it a little bit. They work. I don't know. You can't get better than 90%. You're never going to get 100%.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
It's also one of the better Seinfeld episodes of all time when Kramer's having this.
I just watched that.
Great. Yeah, I don't have any solutions for that. But going back to Tim, your question about how do you do this more, right? How do you think of this more? And so and this goes for any kind of mental default. So the way we're wired is to think of adding first. And when some of the ways that we showed that we're wired to think of adding first are actually also can be flipped around as ways to think of subtracting more. So the first one's really obvious. It's just reminders, right? Remind yourself to subtract that this is an option. And in our experiments, we would say, oh, you can add or you can subtract. Remember, you can add or you can subtract. And it increased rates of subtraction, which is like, okay, big deal. Reminders increase rates of stuff, but it didn't increase rates of adding, right? So people were already thinking of adding. People didn't think of subtracting. Helpful for our research, helpful in the real world. You can think about these reminders that you can put in place for yourself, for other people to subtract, but also when you're thinking about it now, it's like you could go through okay, these are the important decisions that I make. How can I put in place reminders at the time of making the decision? And hopefully this talk in my book, maybe even just the cover are enough to be a reminder. And then the other two are more thought, which again seems kind of obvious. And we did these experiments where, again, these are defaults, right? So when we distracted people in the experiments, basically making them do two tasks at the same time, they became more likely to add. So if you're just going along in your day-to-day, making your normal decisions, you're more likely to go with this first instinct and not consider the subtractive option. And then the last one is just to subtract first. And I think that's just what's happening here, right? Is that we're thinking of adding first and moving on without considering subtraction. If you think of subtracting first, you're not going to run into the problem. And I think that's like you alluded to with removing barriers first, right? I mean, it doesn't make sense to try to improve a system without first getting rid of the extraneous stuff. And so I think it's good practice to think of subtracting first.
Yeah, I mean one hears the term nudge,
right?
And this how do you just constantly give people these little nudges, and that's at least the research I've heard about on that just seems to indicate that they can be incredibly effective if they're done strategically. So in all sorts of behaviors, not just this.
Right, exactly. And people, yourself included, right? And so that's the hard part. Not the hard part, but that's also a really powerful place to put these reminders and nudges in place.
Yeah, my nudge is that, although I haven't literally written it on the screen, but every time I see a great book and there's an Amazon link right there, I think I'm going to call Gulf of Maine and see if they'll just order it for me. And frankly, it comes just as fast. Mm-hmm. I do have to go to Gulf of Maine to pick it up, but there's a benefit to that as well. So those kind of little habits.
Speaking of the power of removing barriers, right? I mean, that's Amazon's whole explosion is down to like, hey, it's just easy to click on this one thing. And you think that's power right there, is like removing the barriers, and not that it's working in the direction that we want it to be working in, but it is showing the power of removing barriers. So
it's interesting to wonder if there would be ways to learn from that effective, barrier removal effort. Mm-hmm. I mean, they have folks sitting around thinking about, how do I make this easier? Mm-hmm. And how can that kind of science and that practice be applied across a much broader range of possibilities?
I'd like to say that
go ahead.
The refill businesses that have cropped up in Maine, they're taking that business model and applying it to a good, doing something good by making it a breeze to refill your containers with the soaps and stuff you need. They're making it easy for you. They're putting the option right in front of you. And even Laura from GoGo Refill, she has a van that'll come to Yarmouth and I think Brunswick to help you get, because South Portland's a little bit farther away. So I think that's what we really need to do, is support those initiatives that are using these behavioral nudges, this to make it easier for us, for sure.
Yeah, and so reduce a barrier, have them do their pop-up with the farmer's market. So everybody's already there at the farmer's market. They brought their, whatever their gear is, you just throw in the refillable container at the same time. And you reliably know it's going to be there for you. So there's a question here about packaging you find at restaurants, single serve creamers, my personal least favorite, sugar packets. Is there something about, I mean, obviously, I guess it's meant to be convenience, both maybe for the store and for the users, but is there something in food laws that make that easier for the store? I mean, is there something that could be done to remove the barrier to getting rid of that kind of stuff, that single serve stuff?
I think that's just a convenience thing. I think that's what it comes down to. And that is a big barrier. We're very, very, we love convenience. Like everything we do is convenience. Like, when I'm working with schools to like implement compost bins, it's like, okay, no, the compost bin has to be like the most convenient bin to get to, and the trash bin has to be less convenient. So,
right.
Like convenience is like the name of the game. And so I think that's probably what that is. Again, if you have the choice to refuse that stuff, definitely do that. You can talk to the business owner and say, hey, can you offer a creamer in a refillable carafe? And if they won't, then maybe you try a different business or something. Really exert your values with by choosing the businesses that support
mm-hmm.
you.
Mm-hmm. Chrissy, you mentioned something a moment ago, a tool of some kind, and I think somehow the audio got clipped a little bit. It was, I'm not, it had to do with sort of the questioners asking about climate equivalence. I think it was how,
yeah.
Okay, what was that again? Could you just sort of cover that again?
Yeah, no, it's just the EPA's tool.
Say that it clipped again. It's what tool?
Really?
Yeah.
Maybe I'll put it in the chat, like a link to it in the chat.
Okay, that'd be great.
You can see it, but it's the EPA's WARM tool.
WARM, W-A-R-M.
Yes.
Is that an acronym?
I believe it is, but I don't know what it stands for.
Don't even guess.
I think it's like waste and reduction or something. A waste reduction model is what it stands for. So let me just put a link for you. But it's kind of fun. It's very in-depth. So you would use it if you really needed to do a deep dive with like your municipality or something. There we go. So I'm sticking it in the chat for everybody.
Great. There it is. I said very simple. Thank you. Something just popped into my head and then it popped back out again. Let me look and just, there's another sort of a follow-up question on these deposits. Basically, there's, I don't know, something like around 8 or 10 states that have some version of beverage bottle deposits. But that movement plateaued decades ago and no new states have come in since then. Is there any, I mean, it's obviously a political economic question, but any insight into why that hasn't spread further? Because I agree with you, it's incredibly effective here in Maine, and I hear elsewhere as well.
Yeah, I don't have insight on why other states haven't adopted it. I think it's completely political. I think that, we're kind of lucky in Maine. I don't feel like the industry has as heavy of a hand as they do in other states necessarily. They do come here, they flock to Maine for sure. But I feel like it's very easy in Maine to get a hold of your lawmaker and talk to them and to advocate for things in Maine. So I think that we have strong environmental laws because of that. So I don't know if that's true in other states or not. I don't know. It's a really good question.
Good lobbying. Somebody was removing a lot of barriers in there. A question, I think, for Leidy, which is just sort of, in our personal lives, have you come across just sort of maybe habits of behavior or whatever, things that people can do to remind themselves to think about subtraction before addition, if the default is addition? Are there just little things you can do?
I mean, when you have a to-do list, also force yourself to think of stop doings. That's a I think about, so you can subtract in three general categories, right? Physical things. And so a lot of these packaging examples are, reduce, reuse, recycle is ordered in that way. Start, maybe even add a remove in front of that. So that's for physical things. For your social situations or activities, that a stop doing list to go along with your to-do list. I mean, we're doing the same thing in our personal lives, right? Or in our just in our calendars. We adding is the default way to try to make our days better, and we add, and at best we say we're proud of ourselves for, oh, I said no to that new thing, right? It's like, well, you didn't really subtract, you just didn't add. And so to actually relieve, if you're feeling overwhelmed with your time, to actually relieve that, you've got to think of stuff that you're doing that you're no longer going to do. And so that's personal or your calendars. And then the ideas, and that's the most powerful one, is how do you rethink the ideas that you've had? And this, I mean, gets a little bit back to Lee's intro. It's like this Western, and it's not only Western, like default to more, and like, why do we think more is better? How can we like subtract that idea and other ideas too? I mean, one, for people ask me this when I start talking about it, they're like, well, what have you subtracted of your ideas? And I think, for example, the murder of George Floyd, I never thought that the US was like this perfectly level playing field, but that definitely made me subtract this notion of, that everybody's starting from even close to the same spot. And also having kids and seeing other little 5-year-olds in the same boat as my kids, it's like, well, this kid doesn't have nearly the same shot at the American dream as my kids. So I think that when you can, I guess the reminders that I talked about before, and then think about them across physical things, across ideas, and across your social interactions.
Yeah, I think if there's a way, we have a really good summarizer on this one, but so if there's a way that we can crystallize those kind of three things into the notes, I think we will try to do that. And of course, I will say, we should also say, we could read the book.
Yeah.
And go that way as well. Chrissy, you see it from sort of, on the ground practical side of things as well. Do you run across examples of folks who seem to have, figured out ways to operationalize what Lottie was talking about, just ways of living that start with that, oh, how can I just do this with a little bit less effort, less purchase, less whatever, and still have the same functionality? I mean, we're talking about, we still have the same quality of life. We still have the same utility. You're just doing it with less. That's
absolutely. I mean, I think it's just, it comes, I mean, I hate to say something so squishy as mindfulness, but I'm going to say it. So like mindfulness, I feel like being aware of the fact that as human beings, we are susceptible to getting on autopilot, and we need reminders, and that our psychology requires cues from our environment to like cue us to do the right thing. So just two examples of some cues that you might implement to reduce your waste is, if you're having trouble getting in the habit of reuse and refill, like put your empty jars front and center in your cabinet. Like put it in a place where you're at your eye level. Don't put it like up away in the cabinet you never use. Don't like stick it in the back of your fridge that you never see. Like put it in front of your face, because that's going to remind you. Something similar too is with compost bins, like in the kitchen, sometimes people say, well, should I keep it under my sink? And I say, no, don't keep it under your sink, because you're going to forget about it. And that's a warm, dark environment. And it's going to smell bad. It's going to make flies, and you're going to have a bad experience. Instead, just like put it in either your refrigerator or your freezer, because you open those doors every single day, and you're going to remember it. And it's not going to smell so bad. I keep mine in my freezer. My freezer is like my waste management site. I put all of my trash and everything in my freezer. It's a great tool, but you're in there every day and it keeps it clean. It's a really clean way to deal with it. So those are some sort of things that are like, you can affect your environment so that it affects you and like reminds you to do these things, you know, it's stuff like that that really helps. You know, you gotta like prep your environment. You know, they say similar things for eating healthy or exercising as well. Like put your fruit on your counter so you can see it, and you will eat it. You know, we really underestimate how much our environment impacts us.
Interesting. This may sound persnickety, but I'll just sort of throw in a personal one. We got somewhere a great cookbook called Grain Bowls, and what is wonderful about these recipes is you measure things for the portion that you're going. You know, if you're serving 2 people, you basically measure the quantities that you have for those 2 people, and we end up with just enough food. There's no waste. Just enough food to satisfy us. There's nothing left over. There's no waste. You know, you buy your grains in bulk, and you don't have to buy a huge, you know, piece of whatever the things are that you're going into it. You can get these small portions, and the book makes it really easy. It removes the barrier of having to sort of think through, well, how do I scale it down from a standard recipes, which is basically, you know, the typical American overloaded plate. So it's really, I think there's opportunities for this subtraction in literally every part of our lives, if we sort of seek them out, which is it's a good thing. There is a story, and there's in there, eat leftovers. Yeah, I love leftovers. I'm not always able to convince the rest of my family to go for the leftovers. Of course, sometimes the leftovers are starting to move, so you know, they're in the science experiment part of the refrigerator. There was a question in here about, does Maine have any laws against the sale of single-use bottles of water? And I don't believe they do. I believe you can go out and buy, you know, they can market little 6-ounce bottles of water, no problem.
No, I don't believe so. I think there are maybe some places, some towns with sort of, I don't know if they're ordinance, I don't think they're ordinances, but there are some rules in some places. And I know I'm being really big because I don't know off the top of my head, but that say like no bottled water in like municipal buildings or something like that. It's definitely an opportunity. You know, there was a wave of towns, you know, making it, you know, passing plastic bag and foam bans. So you could do something like that for plastic bottles, but maybe to Lydia's earlier point about removing the barriers first, it's just like, well, why does that town building need plastic bottles in the first place? Why aren't, you know, fix the plumbing in, you know, and have tap water or something. So, you know, I think that there's definitely opportunities to look at the systemic problem, like why are people dependent on plastic bottles in town, and fix those problems first. Because, you know, nobody likes bans, but so, you know, occasionally they're necessary. But see what those barriers are first. You know, schools are a great example. Like schools, sometimes they just need a water fountain installed, and they're like $1,000. You can just like go fundraise for it and get it installed. It's like super easy.
Right. Sort of building on that, is there anything Mainers can do, Chrissy, particularly, what should they be doing to help move the new EPR law along? What should they do?
Yes. Well, okay. Sign up for our emails, and I will put the link to where you go do that in the chat as well, because we send out action alerts when there's action to be taken. You can also go to recyclingreform.org, and that's where all of the information that you'll need to support this law will be housed. It's, you know, in the short term, we do have a municipal survey that is going out to recycling managers in all the towns of Maine that we really want them to fill out. So if you can call up your recycling manager in your town. I've actually already contacted the one in Brunswick. If you want to call Jay again and say, hey, Chrissy sent you something important, you can about recycling, but don't not like 100 of you, he'd probably kill me. But the other towns, the other surrounding towns, please get in touch with them. I believe that the Maine Municipal Association is sending out a link to this. And some other organizations that are sort of in the know with recycling are sending this link out, and we really need this data. That we're basically trying to get a baseline understanding of Maine recycling programs as they exist now, because DEP doesn't have that data. And without that data, there's the opportunity for opponents of the law to really weaken the law, because they can't, we have to prove that we need certain rules that are strong in order to have a strong EPR law. So this baseline data is super important, and that's our immediate action that we're looking for help with to get towns to fill out that survey.
Chrissy, if there is a link, and maybe it was to that website you had in your presentation earlier, if you could drop that in the chat, that would both capture it now for folks who are online, but it'll also get to everybody in the follow-up as well.
Yes, in there.
Leidy, getting back to you for a moment, if you step back and start, we've been talking about with Chrissy, the work being done at the state level, but lots and lots at the local level. When you think about any opportunities for subtraction really at the national level, does anything emerge for you? I know you're not directly in the advocacy mode, but as you try to translate the results of your research to opportunities at that level where it would really scale up in a very impactful way, apologies for using that word. What
no, I would go back to how we invest, right? That's a personal thing, but it's also a national thing, right? And the same kind of law conversations that you're having, right? Are we also looking at removing subsidies for fossil fuels? Are we looking at in addition to adding the incentives? So I think so rather than dictate some specific subtraction, I think it's what about our financial systems? What about our those policies? Also, if you're talking about engineering at the largest scale, right, and the climate engineering, and again, some of the climate engineering is as straightforward as planting forests to remove CO2, right? And that to me seems like it's more innocuous. Again, getting back to this tension in the system, the planetary support systems are a system, and if you're removing something from that, that's relieving tension, especially when you're removing something that we put there and we know how this system works before. So anyway, I think those are three big categories that I think about it on national and global scales. I know there's nothing specific of okay, lobby this certain thing. The most specific is the divesting, right? I know also that there's a school of thought that you should stay invested in fossil fuels and lobby the companies to divest using your power as a shareholder. So I think one of those two things, we definitely need to be doing that.
Great. So I am really appreciative of the energy that you guys have brought to this tonight, keeping us going on this cold and rainy night, and also to the many folks who are tuned in. We do give folks homework, and let me just remind people who've been with us all the way through this session, next week, we're not going to have a session on Thursday, but we will have the final session on February 17th. In that week off, we're giving you a break. In that week off, if you are interested in trying to keep following on some of this climate work, there is some really interesting documentaries and video that David Attenborough has done. I'm partway through looking at climate change, the facts, which you can see on a, it's too long to, somebody's gonna have to drop it into the chat and it'll come to you in the summary, but documentary area Brunswick-Topsham.tv is a site that has all documentaries, and this one is there. And of course, he also has A Life on the Planet and a whole series of others, but it's both sobering and inspiring, and I would encourage all to do that. And if you run across other really inspiring things, please bring those to the next session and share those back out with all the attendees at the final session. A little bit of actual homework. Thinking about subtraction, of course, and reduction, we want you to think about, is there, over the next couple of weeks, can you do something to reduce your vehicle miles traveled? Is there something you can do? Planning your day, planning your week, consolidating trips, whatever, reducing that kind of work. Another is, and this is one I'm going to actually literally have to read, but consider something that is referred to as a buyerarchy of needs. That's B-U-Y, archy of needs. And do things in this order. Use what you have, borrow what you might need, or trade for it, get it at a secondhand store, make it yourself. And only then, if you can't get through all those things, buy it new. So you just look for those opportunities. Keep those glass jars right in front of you so you don't always pull out the brand new plastic bag to put the leftovers in if you got that jar right there. Think about those kind of things. And I think I will encourage folks to sign up for the next session. It's going to be called, the next session is called Building Resilience in Changing Times. It should be quite inspiring and I hope useful. And we'll try to sum up this 7-part series. And before I close out and hand it back to Lee, I just really want to thank Chrissy and Leidy for the time you spent prepping for this session and the energy you spent on a weekday evening with all of us. And I also thanks to all of you who are with us tonight and hopefully staying warm by a warm screen or a warm wood stove. Lee, what am I missing?
I think
Any wrap up?
Yeah, I think you covered it really well, Tim. I don't have anything to add. I did drop in the chat a link to sign up for the next session, a link to a preview of one of the David Attenborough films. I would just reinforce to everyone, there's no session next week. We've been having a session every single week. Next week is a week off, so check out some other of the great climate resources that are on our websites.
And I saw a couple of notes in the chat. I will get the author and the name of that recipe book that I mentioned, and I'll get it to Lee so it comes back to you in the summary somehow.
Yes.
I didn't want to go off and Google it in the middle of this. It just would be too rude. So thank you all. I really appreciate all of your time. Thanks to CREA and to BTLT for co-sponsoring this effort. Great local organizations. Be sure you are supporting them. And stay in touch with all of Chrissy's good work and follow Leidy's work. Buy the book or check it out from the library. Or make sure the library orders it. So have a wonderful evening. We'll see you in 2 weeks. Take care, everybody.
Good night, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you.